Welcome to Picture Mavericks, where every frame has a story. Today we are looking at a film that critics largely dismissed and audiences embraced with unusual enthusiasm. Grown Ups was released in 2010, directed by Dennis Dugan, written by Adam Sandler and Fred Wolf, and it grossed over $270 million worldwide against a production budget of $80 million. The critical consensus at the time was that the film had no plot, no stakes, and no ambition beyond giving its cast an opportunity to spend a summer weekend together at a lake house. That assessment is not entirely wrong, but it misses something important about what the film was attempting and why that attempt connected so broadly with the people who watched it. The premise is deliberately minimal. 5 childhood friends who grew up playing basketball together reunite 40 years later when their beloved coach passes away. They gather at the lake house where they celebrated their championship as children, bringing their families with them, and they spend the 4th of July weekend together. That is the film. There is no antagonist in any meaningful sense. There is no crisis that needs to be resolved. There is no romantic complication driving the story forward. The film is structured around a series of comedic situations that arise from the group dynamic rather than from any external plot mechanism. For a mainstream studio comedy released at a major holiday weekend, that structural choice is more unusual than it appears. Most films of this scale are built around a problem that needs solving. Grown Ups is built around a group of people who simply need to be in the same place at the same time. The comedy comes from who they are together rather than from what they are trying to accomplish. The casting is the foundation everything else is built on. Adam Sandler, Kevin James, Chris Rock, David Spade, and Rob Schneider are not playing fictional characters who happen to be friends. They are playing a version of the dynamic that already exists between them as performers, and the audience is aware of that at every moment. This is a specific kind of comedy that depends entirely on the credibility of the group. If the friendship does not feel real, nothing that comes from it will land. The film earns that credibility quickly because the performers are not working against the material. They are working within a dynamic that has genuine history behind it, and that history is legible on screen even when it is not being directly referenced. The supporting cast adds a second layer to this dynamic. Salma Hayek, Maria Bello, Maya Rudolph, and Joyce Van Patten play the partners and family members who orbit the central group, and the comedy that comes from the contrast between the men's nostalgia and their actual present lives is one of the film's most consistent sources of humor. The men remember themselves as a certain kind of people. Their families see them clearly. That gap is where much of the film lives. Dennis Dugan as a director is not attempting visual sophistication here, and the film does not require it. The cinematography is functional and the editing is clean. What Dugan does well is stay out of the way of the performers while maintaining enough structure to keep the episodic material from losing momentum entirely. The film moves through a series of set pieces: a day at a water park, a 4th of July celebration, a return basketball game, connected loosely by the emotional thread of the characters reconnecting with something they valued in their childhood. None of these set pieces are built around tension or stakes in the conventional sense. They are built around the question of whether the people in them will make each other laugh, and the answer is consistently yes. That consistency is a craft achievement, even if it does not look like one. Maintaining comedic energy across a film with no plot engine requires the performers to be generating material rather than responding to it, and the cast of Grown Ups does that throughout. The cultural context of the film's success is worth examining carefully because it explains the gap between critical response and audience response more precisely than simply saying the film was broadly appealing. Grown Ups arrived at a specific cultural moment. The 2008 financial crisis had affected a large portion of the film's target audience in concrete ways. The themes the film returns to repeatedly: the value of old friendships, the question of whether success has cost the characters something they cannot replace, the appeal of simplicity over ambition, were landing differently in 2010 than they might have in a period of greater economic confidence. Lenny, the character played by Sandler, is the most financially successful member of the group, and the film consistently positions his success as a complication rather than an achievement. He has given his children everything material and nothing experiential. He has moved away from the place and the people that formed him. The weekend at the lake house is not just a reunion. It is a confrontation with the version of himself he left behind. That thread is not developed with great depth, but it is present throughout, and it resonated with an audience that was actively reassessing what success meant and what it had cost them. The film did not articulate that reassessment explicitly. It did not need to. It simply populated a lake house with people who were living it and let the comedy emerge from the recognition. The critical dismissal of grown-ups was based on legitimate observations. The film has no three-act structure in any traditional sense. Several of its comedic sequences do not connect to anything beyond themselves. The emotional beats are telegraphed well in advance and resolved without complication. By the standards of constructed narrative filmmaking, these are real weaknesses. But those standards are not the only ones that apply to comedy. Comedy has its own standards, and the primary one is whether it makes the audience laugh consistently and leaves them feeling something worth feeling when it ends. Grown Ups does both of those things reliably, and the $270 million it earned is the audience's response to that reliability rather than a response to narrative sophistication. The film understands its own limitations and works within them rather than against them. That self-awareness is a form of craft even when it does not produce the kind of film that rewards analytical close reading in the way that more ambitious comedies do. What Grown Ups ultimately demonstrates is something that gets undervalued in serious discussions of film. Comfort is a legitimate thing for a film to provide. The feeling of watching people who genuinely like each other spend time together in a place that is pleasant and unhurried is not a small achievement, particularly when it is done with the consistency and warmth that this film maintains across its running time. The film is not trying to be more than it is. It is trying to be exactly what it is, reliably and without apology. For a large portion of its audience in the summer of 2010, that was precisely what was needed. That is not a diminished form of success. It is a different kind of success than critical recognition measures. And understanding the difference between those two things is what allows us to take a film like Grown Ups seriously on its own terms rather than dismissing it for failing to be something it was never trying to become. That was Picture Mavericks. If this breakdown gave you a new way into the film, subscribe and stay with us. Every video is built around one idea: that the best stories reward the people who look closer. We will see you in the next frame.